lines. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, I live in Brooklyn. I currently work for AWS on the Python SDK as a software development engineer, which is just Amazon's title for a software engineer, primarily focused on back-end work. In terms of my background, yeah, as already mentioned, I do sort of have a non-traditional background. I didn't study computer science, engineering. I don't even have a bachelor of science or anything along those lines. I actually worked in the entertainment industry for a number of years in marketing and in advertising and sales, and decided to make the transition a couple of years ago. Initially, I actually thought that the world of big data made more sense for me. Particularly with my business background and marketing background, I thought transitioning into a data science role was kind of a natural progression, especially since data science tends to be a little bit more business oriented than software engineering. So I decided to go down that route, and I went to a data science bootcamp at the Flatiron School in 2019. After graduating, or towards the end of graduating, I realized that I was much more on the engineering spectrum of programming than science. And I say that because I really like tinkering with things. I like experimenting. I like getting my hands dirty. I like building things. And science is a lot more, testing hypotheses and things of that nature. And while there is some of that to a degree in engineering, that's not the core of the job, right? So the natural transition that I was able to make from a data science bootcamp was actually into data engineering. My first couple of positions were mostly in that field, including at Colgate. Yes, the very same, the big toothpaste company is where I started out my career. And actually switching over to software, truthfully, it was pretty happenstance, and I feel pretty fortunate. I was interviewing for a data engineering position, and they actually thought I had pretty good programming skills and decided to offer me a job as a software engineer. And given that I knew it would expand my horizons a bit, help me probably land more jobs in the job market, instead of just kind of being narrowly scoped to data engineering, I then became a software engineer. And the way I kind of ended up at Amazon right now is not because I was specifically seeking big tech, although that was an option in the back of my head as something, I could try. I was actually really looking for a new job about a year and a half ago because I wanted more in-person interactions. I know that's not for everyone, and I can definitely speak for people on my team that it's not for everyone, but I was looking for at least more than 0 interactions, which is what I had been having previously. I don't go in all the time, but I have an office that I go to. I have colleagues that I work with, but at least at the moment that may change. There could be some expectation shifts around working in the office, but that's a whole other topic that we could probably spend hours and hours on. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm happy to talk about more about what I do currently, kind of my unusual background and all the kind of twists and turns it has. And yeah, but that's pretty much it.
For anyone that came on late, this is an open opportunity to ask David any questions you have about his background, about what it's like working at AWS, any recommendations he has, what it was like going to Flatiron. Please feel free. But just to kick it off while people are kind of considering their questions, David, I know we had talked about a few points that you might cover. So one was breaking into big tech without a computer science background. Can you flesh that experience out a little bit for us?
Yeah, definitely. So assuming that a lot of folks on this call are either self-taught or bootcamp grads, one thing that they definitely didn't teach me at the bootcamp, and this could have been a factor of it being a data science bootcamp, but it's also something that I've heard of plenty of others, is how to ace the big tech interview. The questions that they ask you in that interview, and if anyone has done any research into this, they probably have seen this. It's a whole like subgenre on YouTube and Reddit and things like that. They don't teach you how to answer the types of questions that they're going to ask you in the big tech interview. And also other types of companies do ask these questions. I have friends that work for smaller companies that ask very, very similar questions. And that's basically like the data structures and algorithm stuff. So linked lists, like talking about like taking advantage of different data structures to answer certain questions. So taking advantage of things like linked lists, recursion, graph data structures, trees, binary trees, things of that nature. If you want to get into big tech as a software engineer or some type of programmer, that is something that you definitely need to study and brush up on. The first resource that anyone might use is LeetCode. I think, again, if you are interested in applying to big tech, you might already be familiar with LeetCode. It's very, very, very popular and very widely used. The one issue with it is if you're a little bit more of a hands-on learner, they just ask you questions. They don't really provide any guidance as to necessarily why the answer is correct. So if you're kind of looking for more of a comprehensive, if you're looking for more of a comprehensive like study guide or something like that, there are other offerings out there. Like I've used Algo Expert in the past, which is like a paid service, which is similar to LeetCode, but it comes with like classes and explainers and things like that. Besides that, I think a lot of the time people are quite intimidated by the big tech interview. And all they're really looking for in the programming questions is to see how you think. So asking questions is definitely encouraged. You do not need to necessarily write compilable code. For Amazon, even, it's really just a text editor with syntax highlighting. There's no code execution whatsoever with what they use. So it's really they're looking to see your problem solving skills. And while you might not encounter those questions, those actual questions on the job, like you're not going to be using recursion all the time. You're not going to be using linked lists all the time, especially if you write in Python. They're really looking to see if you can solve problems and how you think, and if they can work with you and teach you. So that would be what I would recommend. But yeah.
Great. It looks like we have some questions starting to come in the chat. So Oscar is asking, what age did you start coding and what languages did you start with?
Yeah, so I pretty much started programming when I decided to make the transition to data. I mean, I guess I did like dabble in one or two computer science courses in high school, but I wouldn't really consider that like the beginning. I would really consider the beginning when I decided to look into big data and doing a data science bootcamp as a serious thing. So I guess I would have been 25 at the time. In terms of the languages I was using, it's pretty similar to what I'm doing now. And that's Python. Python was the first programming language that I learned. It's the one I've used by far the most. I have dabbled in others, but in terms of the main language that I've used in a professional background, it's always been Python, and it's the first language I've learned. The other language being SQL. Starting out from more of an analytical perspective, has grown into more of an operational perspective. I don't use it at all now since I work on an SDK, but that's really what my primary background is in. I've definitely dabbled in JavaScript, TypeScript, and Golang as well, though, but Python by far the most.
Great. Next question from April. I'm sorry, this is from Chi. Can you talk a little more about your daily work? You mentioned Python, SDK. What technical skills does that involve?
Yeah, so it's actually quite a unique position. So, I work for AWS, and 99% of engineers that work for AWS work on a service team, right? They work on one of the 350 plus and counting services that AWS has to offer. I don't. I work on an SDK. If you're not familiar with what that is, you can think of it as a set of interfaces as code that make it easier for developers such as yourself to interact with various S3 services or various AWS services, namely S3 is the main one that people use. So it's basically just an abstraction over all of the different REST APIs that allow AWS customers to easily interact with AWS services such as S3, EC2, things of that nature. In terms of the skill sets, or in terms of what I do day to day, and I think this is also probably a misconception and something I'm happy to talk about more. This job really made me realize this. Software engineering is hardly programming. I know that might sound like a controversial opinion. Programming is the end result of a lot of very, very painstaking and hard design work. You are certainly using programming as a tool, throughout that process to develop hypotheses and test them. But programming is the easy part of the job. I hate to break it to people. And in terms of how much time you are actually spending writing code, I mean, the more senior you get, obviously, the less time, but even relatively early on, I'd say it's maybe 20%. You're really spending most of your time writing designs, writing technical designs, reviewing technical designs, iterating on technical designs. So that is probably what I'm primarily doing on a daily basis. Looking at different tools that I can use to kind of help accomplish whatever it is that I'm working on at the moment. For example, I can't really share too many details on this, but a project I'm working on at the moment is automating a way to rotate our GitHub credentials. So it's looking into all of the different services at AWS that we can use to accomplish that. What cadence makes the most sense? How do we keep things secure? How are we notified when things break? Things of that nature. That requires a lot of diagramming, design work, etc. In terms of kind of the more technical skills, like if we're going to get into kind of the nitty gritty technical skills that you need, well, I work on Python, so certainly that. Also kind of understanding how our APIs work generally, right? So we have hundreds of services and we can't write APIs for all of them. That isn't sustainable. There's only a couple of us on any given SDK team. So we've developed a framework over the years that allows service teams to write basically like a language agnostic API contract. And the SDKs basically consume those contracts and generate code that our customers can then use broadly, I guess. So understanding how that works is very important. Understanding our internal processes is important. And yeah, so I would say, I mean, knowing Python, since I'm on the Python SDK team, is very important, but and knowing like the Python packaging open source ecosystem, like how pip works, how PyPI works, how Twine works, like how PEPs work. PEPs are basically style guides that have been discussed and approved by the Python community over the years, are important as well. But the most I guess proprietary information that will probably take the most time to learn is in terms of what's specific to the SDKs org, is kind of generally how our SDKs are built under the hood. The stuff I was talking about with design and things of that nature, that's kind of more broadly applicable to software engineering as a whole, but also software engineering at big tech, I guess I would say, where the technical rigor is very high and there's a lot of emphasis on design. That's kind of what you're going to see. So I guess that's what I would say are the skills that you need in my job. Just to, I guess, quickly finish up, since I don't work on an application, I'm not working with servers, I'm not working with databases really that much. I do have plenty of experience with those in the past, but it's not something I have to deal with right now. So it's not something, I'm not like querying a Postgres database all the time these days, but yeah.
Great, thank you. Moving on to the next question. This is from April. David, are you saying that you cannot enter the tech world without coding knowledge?
No, not at all. I mean, I would say if you're trying to be a software engineer, you certainly need to know how to program. I think that's a given. That is the end result of any engineer's job. If that is not what you're trying to do, there are obviously plenty of non-technical roles within the tech space. I can't really speak to those since I'm a software engineer, and I don't really interact with the business very much. I'm not really concerned with bottom lines or anything of that nature. I'm really concerned with performance, with bugs, with potentially breaking changes that we accidentally merged or something along those lines. But yeah, I mean, I would never say don't code or don't learn anything about code if you want to get into tech. It can't hurt, for sure. And also like learning a little bit of Python or learning a little bit of JavaScript here or there, I think you can learn it pretty quickly. And it can be the great thing about those languages is that they're easy enough to learn that they can just serve as a tool for you. Like plenty of data analysts don't really know how Python works, but they don't need to. They just know that it lets them analyze their data sets way more quickly than Excel can. So by all means, don't learn to code if you don't want to. You don't need it to get into tech, but it can't hurt, you know?
Thank you. Next question is from Monique. Did you get an AWS certification?
No, that is not something that was a requirement. It's something I may do in my spare time. I have colleagues that do it. Truthfully, I don't have a lot of spare time. It is something that is beneficial for us because uniquely for the SDKs org, because it does help us understand how taking these courses would help us understand how our customers are using these products more and how the SDKs kind of fit into that pipeline. But no, I don't have a certification. Excuse me, I may get one at some point, but also at the same time, it kind of is like, you know, working at AWS, it's sort of like you kind of innately get exposed to so much knowledge. It's almost as if you have one. So I don't feel the need to, but I might still at some point.
Next question is from Brandon. How did you pitch your non-tech skills when finding a place in tech?
That is a great question. Well, that's a hard question. I think when I started my career, I didn't think I could get a job at Amazon or a Google or places like that. And truthfully, I think it would be very difficult for almost 99% of bootcamp grads to do that. So when I was getting my first job, I think it's important. A lot of places are actually quite flexible with your background. There are still, even with the economic downturn, there are still more jobs, engineering jobs, than there are people that are qualified to do them right now. So you don't necessarily need to position yourself. It's more, how do I put this? It's more you need to show why you're interested, I guess. I think going to a company where the technical rigor isn't as high or where the barrier to entry isn't as high is perfectly fine for a first job. It's really just about getting experience for that first one. And plenty of places really don't care. My first job in tech, most of the engineers there were bootcamp grads. It's something that some places target, actually. So it's really more about expressing your interest in the field, showing the technical projects that you've worked on, and why you would be a great hire, what you can do, then and less about, I guess, what you don't have, you know. You could also, if you're going into more of like a hybrid kind of like engineering role, like maybe like a customer success engineer, support engineer, forward deployed engineer, I've heard all different types of names for that. Assuming you have like a business background or a client facing background, you can leverage that. I also encourage people to talk about like their unique experiences, bringing unique perspectives to roles that they're interviewing for. But yeah, I think if you are going for like a Google or Facebook or something as a first job out of a boot camp, particularly with what the boot camp does equip you with versus what it doesn't, you're going to have a hard time. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is very, very difficult. And I think most folks would be a better use of their time to look elsewhere for their first couple of jobs, to build up their experience, to build up their competencies, to then get to that point. But yeah, I hope that answers that person's question.
Next question is from Trey. I made it to the final interviews for a software engineering apprenticeship, but wasn't selected after displaying my code. They wouldn't tell me why I wasn't chosen. After the interview, I figured my problem solving was too slow for them. Any tips on getting better at solving bugs and or solving problems in a quick and efficient manner?
I mean, that's tough to answer. You know, I will say, assuming whoever asked this doesn't have a lot of experience, a lot of hands-on experience coding yet, you're going, especially in a job market like now, you're going to get close a lot of the time. I definitely came in second place a lot, and it sucks. There's not really anything you could do about it besides just try and try and try again and hope it'll work out. And I'm sure it will. I think half of it is about
Okay.
you do have to get, sorry, I think someone's mic was on.
Layla.
I think you do have to get lucky to a certain degree, but you have to put yourself in a position to get lucky, right? Which means working hard, studying a lot, interviewing a lot. In terms of the specific question about how do you improve yourself, I mean, without knowing more context, because all I really know based on the question is that this person wrote code and it was reviewed by hiring managers and they another direction, or they just liked something they saw from someone else. It's a great instinct. I think the person also mentioned that they did ask for feedback but didn't get any. I think that's a great instinct. Even if they don't answer it, someone will, and it'll allow you to iterate on your interviewing process and make you better in the future. But all I can really say to that is just you got to keep studying. A lot of these things just come with experience. It's not something you can innately know without seeing it 100 times. So again, without knowing more specific detail about what exactly happened with this person, that's really all I can say. I know that's not necessarily the best, most actionable advice, but just keep working at it. You'll get it. You'll get that job eventually.
Next question's from Eldana. How was your experience trying to break in? Was it through connections or something else? Basically, how did you land the job? Where do you recommend we start hunting? Please.
Yeah, totally. So I can talk about, I mean, is this about, do you know if this is about Amazon or is this about like any of my positions?
I'm guessing in general, and Eldana, if you can comment or just unmute real quick and clarify, that would be even faster. All right, I would just go with your gut. I would guess it's probably in general versus.
Yeah, I can talk about both for sure. So one thing that's really important, the hardest interview to get is the first one. Making it through that first layer, making it to a human is the hardest thing that you can do. The reason why is because all these big companies, it's so easy to apply now that thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people do. And it's not possible for human recruiters to parse through all those resumes. So they use software to do that for them. You can really try to optimize your resume to have all of the keywords in it so that it gets through the review part, the resume parser. Or you can try getting in touch with hiring managers and recruiters directly. I went more that route when I didn't have any experience and I just needed to get my resume in front of as many people as possible. So finding positions online that you're interested in, then going on LinkedIn, finding hiring managers for the role, finding recruiters and contacting them. At the very least, that is going to improve your hit rate because maybe not 100% of the time, but a much larger percentage of the time, someone with human eyes is looking at your resume. And that is the hardest hill to get over. If you get over that, and you get over that a lot, then you will interview more. And if you interview more, you are more likely to get a job offer. I would also say that over time, as you get experience, a lot of recruiters will actually come to you. The way I got my first software engineering job, the way I got my job at Colgate, and the way I got my first software engineering job was actually recruiters reaching out to me through LinkedIn. And the more experience I've gotten, the more inbound contact I get from recruiters. I'm not saying that's necessarily the right way to go in the long run. Once you get more experience, you can afford to be pickier with the positions that come your way. You should have an easier time just submitting your resume because you do have that experience now. It's your resume is just going to naturally be better optimized for the position that you're interviewing for. Also, as you apply for more advanced roles, there's less competition. So the first job is oftentimes the hardest to get in any industry. And engineering is no exception because you have the most competition, because it requires the least qualifications. And crazily enough, the way I got this Amazon job is just by applying on the website. I still can't really believe that it happened that way, but it did. I actually got hit up by, and I mean, this tells you how different the job market was like a year and a half ago. I got hit up by no less than half a dozen Amazon recruiters on LinkedIn for various open engineering positions at the company. But this one was the one that sounded by far the most interesting to me, and the one I actually applied for and got. So again, just to reiterate, and there are a million different ways to do this, optimize for getting your resume in front of human eyeballs, or stuffing your resume with a bunch of keywords based on each job description that you're applying for. But to me, that sounds like a pain in the ass. And then in time, once you build up more experience, you shouldn't have to put in quite so much effort as you do for the first or second job because you have that experience. But yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Thank you. Next one is from Malachi. David touched on it a little bit earlier, but what separates the work between a data scientist and a data engineer, and how did you decide that data engineering was more of a fit for your interest?
Yeah, so I would describe a data engineer is basically a software engineer that builds data pipelines, I would say. So basically that allows for data to flow from one place to another, for multiple sources of data to flow into one place where they can be combined and transformed and whatnot. A data scientist is someone who's trying to very broadly glean insights and information from the data. That can range from anything from just doing basic data analysis, that can be building regression models, that can be doing really crazy advanced data science. Like basically the spectrum of data science goes from like finding like averages and means of like a data set to like GPT chat transformers, right? And everything in between. That's all under the bucket of machine learning, and that's all something that a data scientist might do. So basically, data scientists are trying to get information or help build algorithms on top of their data to support some business function. A data engineer is really a support role for a data scientist or just anyone who's looking at any kind of data, because they are operationally making that data available, I guess. So from a very high level, that's how I would describe it.
This is from Emily. Would you recommend the Udacity data engineering nano degree for landing a data engineering role? I saw that you did that on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago. At the time, there were a lot of data science courses that you could take and a lot of software engineering courses that you could take, but not a whole lot of data engineering ones. So there wasn't exactly a ton of options out there, and this seemed like a pretty decent one. I had a friend who did Udacity and something similar. I don't quite remember what it was, but yeah, I mean, it was pretty good. I will say, like, I did find it kind of easy and pretty basic. It was definitely something to do at the time, and I figured it didn't hurt, and it certainly didn't. I would just recommend looking around to see what the landscape, what the options are, what options there are now, because this was like over 3 years ago, and the world of data engineering courses can be completely different now. So I would just see what's out there.
This is from Zena. How would you rank the importance of a portfolio when trying to break into tech? What are some things companies would like to see for working in data?
For working in data, well, if you're doing anything with programming, you should have a GitHub account. That GitHub account sort of acts like a portfolio, I would say. You should have, and this is really for any software engineer, any aspiring software engineer, web developer, or data scientist. You should have a set of projects on your GitHub account that you are ready and willing to advertise and share. The code should be clean, commented, and documented, and there should be well-written READMEs. So for recruiters who aren't going to look at the code, they can just go to the GitHub projects page and just read the README and understand what this thing does and how to use it. So I would recommend, in terms of a portfolio, all you really need is a GitHub account. Just make sure that the projects that you are ready and willing to share have very curated, very clean, and thoroughly put together projects that you can share, especially with, and I would emphasize clean code, commented code, documented code, and a good README. If we're talking about, like, if you're trying to be a designer, I can't really help you there, but I would imagine having some sort of website to host your design work would be more needed. You do not need a website to be a software engineer. I've never had my own website. No, many of my colleagues do, and it definitely doesn't hurt, especially if you're interested in front end work. You might need it more if you're trying to do front end, obviously, but you don't need it. I've also really only did the GitHub project thing with very refined READMEs and very clean, presentable stuff for when I had no experience and I needed to present some work. After I had experience, the interviewers were not interested in talking about the personal projects that I've worked on, really. It was really about what I'd done previously, in which case they're not really going to look at your GitHub because you're probably working on private repos anyway. So they can't really see anything there. So yeah, just to reiterate again, if you have experience, you probably don't need too much. Your experience should speak for itself on your resume, and you should be able to speak to it. If you don't and have just technical projects that you've worked on, presumably you've put a couple of those on your resume, and you should have they should all be hosted on GitHub with a very clean code, well commented so people can follow it, well documented so people can read doc strings and stuff, and then but most importantly, a good, thorough, well written, no grammar errors or spelling errors or anything README that can be referred to by anyone taking a look.
Next question is from Chi. When you say technical designs, do you mean UML?
I think I know it. I think that's an old diagramming method. But yeah, that's certainly one of them. So one skill that they definitely don't teach you in boot camps or even on the job, you just kind of have to figure it out, is writing to different audiences. So Amazon is a very strong writing culture, I believe, and this is, I think, unique to Amazon. One of the only places, if not the only place, where someone will write a technical document and make a meeting for it, and people spend the first 20 minutes of that meeting reviewing and commenting on it, and then you talk about it. So the first 20 minutes of the meeting are just people in silence reading the document. But yes, diagramming is definitely an important part of it, because technical design, if you just use text, can get very dense and very confusing and very hard to parse, I would say. A lot of engineers are very particular with their word choice. So they're very particular with, so they read through documents very slowly and will pick apart each and every word, and they can misconstrue things because of how much detail that they're looking into your document are. But yeah, so UML is definitely something that you could use. It's a little bit more old fashioned, I would say, but there's nothing wrong with that so long as the flow of the diagram is clear. But yeah, I would say, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk kind of more about what goes into our design process, but in terms of answering that specific question, yes, diagramming is definitely something that is strongly encouraged.
Oscar asks, why Python? Why not use C++ instead, since Python is slower and Python methods are written in C++ for speed?
That's kind of a broad question. I would say, that's a very existential question, right? If we're talking about why use Python over C++ in general, well, I would say most of the world tends to fall in the Python bucket, right? I believe it's the most popular programming language, but there's a reason for that, right? It's because it's really easy to learn. I got this job because Python is what my background is in. And if you're asking why my background is in Python, that is because the world of big data primarily uses Python. and data scientists who don't really know how to program like Python because it's really easy to use. But yes, the conundrum that Python is not performant, despite being the go-to language for big data, is quite the conundrum. But yeah, I mean, in terms of why I specifically use it, that's just kind of where my experience fell. It is a super popular language. I would not recommend anyone learning C++ today because it is old. It is not very commonly used. There are things, I think I see someone mention in the chat that memory leaks are a problem. I wouldn't say memory leaks are a problem per se in C++, but it's a lower level language where you have to manage memory, and you don't have to do that in Python. I would probably push people towards newer, more commonly used languages that are more performant, such as Rust, or Rust has become very popular among people who are looking for like really low level compiled languages. Even I know Java is like as old as C++, but Java, I feel like has stood the test of time a little bit more than C++. Go is another one which is built for concurrency. But yeah, I mean, if we're talking existentially, why Python is because if you need to hack something together, just get something off the ground really, really quickly, I mean, you're not really going to get a better option than Python. Maybe JavaScript, because it's also almost as syntactically easy to pick up and write stuff as Python. But yeah, I think I've heard like a saying somewhere that Python is the second best language for everything, which is true. Because the other huge advantage that Python has is the packaging ecosystem. There is a package for literally everything in Python. So whatever problem you need to solve, you probably can solve it in Python. There's just likely a language out there that can probably do it a bit better, a bit more performant, things like that. There are exciting, like advances in Python, like Python 3.11 has had huge performance boost. 3.12 is going to be way more performant. There's this guy, I think his name is Chris Latner. He's worked on LLVM and I think Clang, and I think he developed Swift or did something with Swift. Swift is the new iOS language. He's been working on like this superset of Python called Mojo that is kind of like what TypeScript is to JavaScript. And it's supposed to take away all of the performance issues. So if anyone is curious about Python and performance, highly recommend looking up Mojo. It's still very early days, but very exciting stuff. He had a really long interview with that big like tech podcaster, Lex Friedman. Definitely recommend checking that out as well. Yeah, without I could talk about performance for hours, so I don't want to get too much in the weeds of that, but yeah.
Next question, this is from Subin. Can you suggest some boot camps for data science?
Boot camps for data science. I mean, I went to Flatiron and Flatiron was good. I mean, they could have changed the curriculum again because this was 4.5 years ago, but I felt that they over optimized for like big, sexy, like things that they were going to teach people to market rather than like practical skills that you actually need to be like an entry-level data scientist. Like we talked more about deep learning and neural networks than we did about SQL, which I think is a big mistake because like neural networks, the math is really, really complicated behind them. And it takes like people with PhDs to really kind of know what they're doing with those things. Data science, I think, is also hard because I'm not just dissuading or disparaging anyone from doing it. It's just that a lot of it is like really high level math. And a lot of that time, I don't think studying that kind of math necessarily, I don't think the boot camp environment is necessarily the most ideal for that, just because a lot of these things just take time to marinate and like really sink in to your brain. Like if you're going to a web development boot camp, you just kind of need to learn a couple tools, need to learn the syntax to kind of get you started and get a job. Data science, I feel, is a little different. The knowledge of the machine learning algorithms, I think, needs to be a bit deeper because the math is really, really high level. I know some folks that have started a data science boot camp and went on to get data science degrees, master's degrees. So I would also look at that as a potential option. But again, yeah, I don't really know the state of the data science boot camp today because it's been over 4 years. But I would say, despite what I said earlier about maybe Flatiron teaching us like some less practical stuff and more like marketable, sexy stuff, it still was a good boot camp that taught me a lot. I had really, really smart people in my class, and it served as a launching point for me. I will say though, the boot camp was a starting point. Once you finish the boot camp, you are not done learning. You were only just beginning. So I would emphasize that as well.
Stephanie asks, how many rejection emails did you get before finally getting a job?
Oh man, a lot. I don't know the number, but a lot. I did also hustle really, really hard. I think I was the first person in my boot camp to get a job, but that's because I kind of knew how to apply to jobs from previous experience, and I knew I had like clever ways of getting my resume in front of people. I don't know what the protections are like these days, and I don't know if I should necessarily be advertising this, but I remember at the time, there are a number of Chrome extensions that are mostly used by like outbound salespeople trying to like reach out to you about like some tech product that they're trying to sell. But they're extensions that basically with like a pretty high level of accuracy will guess hiring managers' email addresses. I definitely took advantage of that to try to reach out to people directly and email them. So that was definitely one way I got my resume in front of people more. But yeah, I mean, if you apply to 100 jobs, I think the expectation that one of those jobs will turn into an offer is like reasonable. So that's 99 rejections out of 100. But that's what it takes. You just need one or two, hopefully, then you could use it as leverage. But it's a lot. It's mostly rejection until it's not. So yeah, this is kind of how it goes.
Great. Next question is from Kelly. I'm currently working in IT as a help desk job since I just needed something while I searched for a software engineering role. How did you present skills from your background in the context of engineering and development?
I'm not exactly sure I understand the question. Like, how did I present my engineering background, I guess?
Kelly, if you're on and can unmute and clarify that question.
Hi, thanks for putting this on, by the way. I just want to say, kind of like, how did you present the skills you learned from your non-traditional background into the roles that you were applying for?
You mean
That
like,
makes sense.
how did I bring like my other background outside of everything I had just learned into the interview process?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So I think I probably talked about like, I don't know, be problem solving, like being solutions oriented is like a big buzzy term. I think engineers, especially if you work in an engineering driven organization, can kind of get bogged down in like technicals, obviously. But a lot of the time things just need to be shipped. Obviously we want to build, strong, maintainable, well-designed systems, but all that means nothing if nothing ever gets shipped and no one's ever using anything, right? So kind of like saying that you are like business inclined and like, you want to help customers, I think is a good thing to leverage if you have more of a business background. I mean, it sounds like you work at an IT support desk, so you're dealing with, they're not external customers. I guess they're people that work at the company that you work for or something along those lines. But you can talk about how you know how to deal with customers and how you work to help solve their problems. You could leverage that into just kind of talking about how you want to do that as code, or you want to do that as programming new features for a website or something like that. That is definitely, I think, something that folks would want to hear. In terms of like me specifically, since I had a business background, I could talk about being client facing and wanting to help them solve their problems, kind of having like being better at having kind of a bigger context like in mind, kind of taking the bigger picture in instead of just kind of narrowly focusing in on the engineering task at hand. I already mentioned being kind of like customer solutions, mentioning that you're like customer solutions obsessed or whatever. You can also just kind of be broad and say you think because you have a different background, you can bring in a unique perspective that will help you solve problems in a unique way that someone with a traditional CS background who doesn't really have exposure to customers or business or anything like that wouldn't be able to solve, or might solve it in a different, less useful way. You could also say how I think communication skills are something that a lot of engineers lack. So if you have any of that, and since you work at a support desk, you have to, since you are communicating with customers directly, you could also talk about that. And how your effective communication skills can help you solve problems for customers more effectively than your more traditionally educated counterparts, I guess.
Thank you. Next question from Oscar. In your opinion, what are the qualities that set great engineers apart from other engineers?
Oh yeah. What makes a fabled 10x developer? Sure. That's tough. There are all different kinds of engineers, and they all have different qualities that make them special or effective. I don't think of myself as one of those. I think I'm perfectly fine. I think I'm pretty average. I think you have to be curious. You're always learning in this field. Once you stop learning, you are going to be left behind 5, 6, 10 years later. So I would say that is really, really important. So being curious, being willing to learn every day is really important. I mean, I was alluding to the design work before, but I think design is way harder and way more nuanced than programming is a lot of the time, right? Like, or I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't exactly say that. A lot of the time there are 1,001 solutions or 1,001 different ways to solve the same relatively simple problem, right? What sets the good engineers apart from the great ones are ones that are able to find the solution that makes the most sense in their ecosystems, I guess, which requires a lot of research, a lot of time, a lot of iteration. And yeah, I mean, I know that's kind of a broad answer. There are a lot of different ways to be a great engineer. Different people have different strengths, but that's certainly a big one that I've seen. If you are not a good technical designer or a good technical writer, you're not going to go that far. And let me preface this by saying that no one is good at first. You have to learn. It's a skill set that requires experience, just like anything, just like programming. But that is going to take you farther than being like the best programmer in the world, I think, because I mean, ultimately, when you're working in a production environment for a big company, you're working with a bunch of other people. You're not building your own stuff necessarily. You're building on existing stuff. So that's important. Being resilient is really important. Not wasting other people's time. Really trying to figure out a problem yourself is important to a certain degree, I should say. Knowing when to either A, give up and ask for help, or B, being like, this problem isn't really teaching me anything. I just need to know some weird syntax, and I know X, Y, or Z person is going to be able to help me really quickly, then ask them. But make sure you've done your research and your work beforehand, I guess, before making that call. But yeah, I think the biggest but just again, taking a step back again, the biggest qualities I think are like learning and being curious. Diving deep into problems is a really big one as well. And yeah, getting good at design is probably the biggest thing, I think. But these all come in time, I should say. Sorry.
No problem. We have time for just a couple more questions. This is from Ricky. If you could only pick one, and assuming you already have a portfolio, how would you spend your time? A, create a special standout project, or B, practice your data structure and algorithm and systems design consistently?
Sure. That's a great question. For me at the beginning, it was easy because I had a capstone project at my boot camp. So I just used that. I think the project you should talk about is either the one that you finished the most recently or the one you worked on the most recently. It's hard to say exactly at what scale or what it should be, because everyone's what everyone is interested in is a little bit different. What everyone wants to work and what everyone's skill sets are is a little bit different. But it doesn't need to be crazy. Just something that displays your use of like X, Y, and Z technologies, I guess. Like one project that I worked on when I was in between jobs was building an API integration with what's it called? Blue Sky, the Blue Sky API, using a Django app. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to show off my skills with Django, and I wanted to build a data pipeline because I was a data engineer, and but I didn't want to pay much, if anything, for data that's coming in consistently through API. And that kind of limited my options to the weather, pretty much. Weather data is publicly available and free. But yeah, I would say the one project to focus on when you're interviewing and to emphasize is either the one that you're working on currently that is in enough of a finished state that you can talk about it, where you can talk about the problems that you faced, how you overcame those problems, things like that, or the one that you finished the most recently. Besides that, I don't think you need to spend a crazy amount of time doing system design work. Like I know I talked a lot about it, but like for entry-level positions, they don't expect you to be an expert on that. I definitely recommend boning up, like taking classes that kind of teach you the basics, like solid design principles, for example. And that's certainly something you can leverage in the interview that like the hiring managers are going to love because like it shows that you're interested in the space and like are really looking into what it means, like that it's not just programming, it's not just what, it's about why and how. So I wouldn't spend a crazy amount of time doing that, but you certainly can take a class or two. A good way of doing that is by data modeling. So like sometimes you get the question of like, let's say we build a blog app, how would you model the data that supports the app? So like, oh, we'll have a user table, we'll have a blog table that will relate on this key, things like that. And then I would spend a lot of time leak coding if you are going for big tech or for going somewhere for where the technical rigor is really, really high. For more startups and smaller companies, you don't necessarily need to be doing those questions. I've gotten plenty of very, very simple or higher level programming questions. So you don't need to spend too much time on leak code unless you are specifically going for those types of jobs, I would say.
Great. And then last question that we have time for, I think this is the most widely applicable one, and a great place to end. This is from Kikeli again. How would you recommend getting into the industry at such a difficult time with all the hiring freezes and layoffs? What does the hiring process look like on your end when looking at early career engineers?
Yeah, so I actually don't get too much visibility into this, unfortunately. Basically, I'll just get thrown into an interviewing loop at some point. I don't really have a say on how the hiring process works or anything like that. That's kind of how these big tech companies work. Positions are very, very, very siloed. And actually, I think we technically don't have a hiring freeze right now, but we are literally not hiring anyone externally. So there's nothing I can do for anyone here. I know that Amazon or AWS is a partnership with Ada, which is this boot camp specifically for women, I believe. And we've gotten a couple of interns that way. Like they have a whole partnership with them. I don't know if I can necessarily speak to how to deal with this job market specifically, because every difficult job market comes with its own problems. I can tell you that I actually got fired from my first engineering job because I didn't think I was good enough. And that was in December of 2019. And it's been a little while, but I think we all know what started happening a couple months later, right? COVID. And for me, it was about being flexible. So like, for example, I live in New York. New York is an extremely competitive market, regardless of what you're doing. A lot of people want to live here. A lot of companies want to be here. People are applying to jobs here all the time. So I would be flexible on location. I would be willing to move. If like this is the career that you want, you should be willing to go places for it. That doesn't mean it has to be permanent. It could be only for a year or two. If you need to move to some random city in the middle of nowhere, there's a need for software engineers everywhere. And Yeah, so you don't need to go for some like big cool startup in New York or something along those lines. Colgate, the technical rigor, I'll be completely honest with you, was quite low. I wasn't super impressed with, even when I got in the door, about like how rigorous things were there. However, it was a job. It helped me level up my tech skills, my programming skills. It got me experience. I worked with really, really nice people, and it led to bigger and better things. And I was willing to take that job at the time because I didn't really have a whole lot of options because of COVID. No one was hiring. But also a company like Colgate, I knew, because I mean, everyone was talking about it at the time. I got the job in like April of 2020. So everyone's talking about how we're going to go to a massive recession because all of our companies are closed up, all the shops are closed or whatever. And I figured to myself, well, I think Colgate should be okay during a recession. I still think, unless things are really dire, I think people are still going to be brushing their teeth. I think they're still going to get like household cleaning supplies and things like that. Maybe they won't get a shiny new computer from Apple or like a new like Balenciaga bag or something like that. But so what I was keeping in mind is that I think I should have good job security, good benefits here. And I did. My job was never, in terms of like layoffs, it was never in question or anything like that. And it was a good jumping off point for me. It was also a job not based in New York. I just happened to be lucky at the time because everything was closed. So I never had to go into the office. I was able to work completely remote. So I would say be open and be flexible. That's really the most important thing. Unless something is really preventing you from moving, I understand familial obligations and things like that. I would highly recommend being flexible on where you work. You could look into remote jobs as well. But yeah, be flexible is what I would say.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, David. And thank you to all the participants for your great questions. We really appreciate your time. I'm sure you can see that there are plenty of people who appreciate your time as well. Thank you to everyone for participating. And David, are you open to folks connecting with you on LinkedIn?
Sure. Yeah. People can feel free to ask me questions there too. If I get as many as I did today, I don't know how much time I'll be able to spend answering all of them, but I'll do what I can.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. The recording will be up on the OnRamp website in a couple of days. Have a great rest of your day and see you next week in our next talk. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks.